So, you know, guys, what are we doing here? Eh?
We're watching a movie.
Oh, just enjoying organic chemistry.
Nathan.
I think why AFC has a little before it's
like really
specialized in Congo.
Hello, ça va?
Imashi. What are we doing in here?
Cooking rice.
I heard that statement.
Isn't this supposed to be for Shemish and Shan? Chemistry make.
Wait, you guys, is this Comptabilité?
Comptabilité.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm in the wrong class.
Exactly. It's like you won't say what?
So for the economic students for the first semester, we are done with everything. I just need to give you exam past papers and things like that for your practice. So, but for the ENCG guys, we have something left to do. There's another topic we have to cover that you guys are going to have in your first semester. So as requested last time, I'm going to repeat on certain topics, which are, firstly, are you able to get me clearly?
Yes, we can get you.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat, or I'm going to do a petite revision on certain topics as requested last time, which are the following. We have balance the comptes. So this one will require me to just go through the whole chapter for the comptes. And secondly, we have the Grande Livre, which I have to redo as well. And lastly, we have the C.P.C. So if there are any additions or maybe subtractions, please make them known to me now. Okay, cool. So can you please open onto page 21 of the recent book I sent you, the revised one. We're going to start off from there. So the first thing we'll be doing today is le comptes. So reading from the top, it reads, notion de compte. Par convention, le compte est une table. Le côté gauche du compte est réservé aux emplois et le côté droit est réservé aux ressources. So here we have two things that are being explained. We are being told that the left-hand side is reserved for les emplois, which is the debited side, and the right-hand side is reserved for the resource, which are the credit things that we possess. So well, basically what I just said is what we have here. We have le côté gauche réservé aux emplois et appelé. And what we call an accounting transaction under the compte is imputation. So whenever we record a transaction or a movement in cash, it's called as imputation. Donc, jusqu'à là-bas, est-ce que c'est clair? Oui. Okay, on passe. So there's this point that I have highlighted in green, which is very important. It reads, le solde de compte est la différence entre le total des sommes inscrites au débit et le total des sommes inscrites au crédit. So solde is simply the difference between the credit and the debit side. So, and what we record on the total figures is the greater amount of the two. So if one figure is 10,000 and the other is 7,000, what we would have is 10,000 for the totals and would have a 3,000 as the sold on the greater hand side, on the lesser hand side. So what the logic of the sold is to make both sides equal. So if we add something to, excuse me? Okay, so I was saying what the logic is for the sold is to have both sides equal. So if we have a less amount on each side, we would have to add the difference between the two figures. But what remains written on the totals is strictly the greater amount of the two. So I hope that's clear. So moving on to this part now, which is also important. I'm sorry for that. I had a network glitch. So I presume I ended on this highlighted point, n'est-ce pas? Where did the connection cut off from? If you can tell me, please.
Just on the highlighted part.
Okay, so let me just repeat myself. So it reads, le solde des comptes est la différence entre le total des sommes inscrites au débit et le total des sommes inscrites au crédit. So here what we simply have is that the solde is the difference between the greater hand side and the lesser hand side. But in consideration that the total figure should always be equal. So further explanation is that what we get as the total figure should be the amount which is the greatest, which is greater between the two. So in a situation where we have 5 and 10,000 on each side, so we're going to have 10,000 as the total. Then the side which has 5,000, we are going to have to add another 5,000 to make it equal to 10. So that the whole notion of adding something to make it equal to the total is what we call the solde. So this whole thing of adding is what we call la balance des comptes. So hope that's clear. And moving on to the first point, just below the highlighted point, it says, si le total du débit est supérieur au total du crédit, le solde est débiteur. Ici, le solde doit être inscrit au crédit du compte pour égaliser les comptes. So what this point simply says is that if the debit hand side is greater than the credit hand side, so the credit hand side is the side where we have the deficit. And so why it's called solde débiteur is because for people who took accounts, this is what we call the balance brought forward, not the balance carried down, brought forward, the one just after the totals. For people who did not take accounts, a simpler explanation would be you write the side that is greater. So if the credit hand side, you name the solde by the side which is greater. So the point, I repeat the point again. It says si le total de débit est supérieur au total de crédit, le solde est débiteur. So in this case, the greater side was the debit side, and the name of the solde is solde débiteur, so SD. So the solde derives its name from the greater side between the two, between the credit or the debit. And the second point which follows is that si le total du débit est inférieur au total de crédit, le solde est créditeur. So this one is just the inverse of the first one, the previous one we just looked at. It's saying if the total on the debit hand side is lesser than the total on the credit. So by that, it means the credit hand side is greater, the solde est créditeur. So the solde again takes the name of the greater hand side between the two. So that's it for these 2 points, and we move on to something else. So we have these subdivision points just below. I'm just going to explain them to you for you to better understand what really happens with this solde. So it says, the first one says, the one with a hyphen at the beginning. Arrêter un compte, c'est calculer le solde final débiteur ou créditeur. So to close an account, so to say, is to find the solde between the debit or credit hand side. Then we have the second one. It says ouvrir un compte, c'est inscrire les soldes dégagés au moment de la fermeture du côté de sa nature SD or debit. So what this one says is that opening an account is simply, well, for this one, I would give an example in terms of an accounting period. So let's say we had a cash account last year. And as our sole debitor, we had a cash account with no more transactions and we closed the account. So it means we found the sole debitor. And in this case, we'll name it the sole debitor. So this sole debitor, then what they say is ouvrir un compte, which is like reopening it, would be the following accounting year. So that is next year. And we have a cash account again. So to reopen the account, we would have to consider the solde which remained from the previous accounting period. So let's say there was a solde of 5,000, which was solde debitor. And when we start our new cash book, the first thing we had to write is on the libellé is solde debitor. So solde debitor would be on the libellé, and we would have an amount of 5,000 debited. That is in the next compte, the case, in the next accounting period. So then the transactions would follow onto the end and you'd find another solde. But the logic is just carrying on forward with the solde. Hope that's clear. So now we are going to look at how to exactly open an account, on the fundamentals that are necessary when opening an account. So we have the first one is the date. A date is a necessary thing to have in a account. Without a date, our transactions wouldn't be really transparent. So we have dates, we have le libellé des opérations. So the libellé is just a small explanation of what happened in the transaction. And thirdly, we have montant imputé. The montant imputé is just the amounts that each transaction carries. And lastly, we have le solde. So le solde is also an important thing when dealing with the comptes. So like before, we have 3 types of comptes. So now that we've done with the necessities of each compte, we have 3 types of comptes, and these necessities are always present in all the 3 types of comptes. So the first one is compte à colonne regroupée or mariée. So this one is, well, it would be easier for you to just remember it as compte à colonne mariée. So it means the columns are placed just right next to each other. So the debit and the credit columns are placed just right next to each other, henceforth its name. So we have the dates to our far left, we have the libellé, we have the debit and credit side placed just right next to each other. So you would have to master all the ways of all the tables on how we draw this, on how we draw the compte, because these are really necessary. There are questions where a professor would specify on which method he would want to see, just to make his work easy as well when correcting papers, because I'm sure it's also quite difficult. So you have to know each and every way, how each way is different from the other. So moving on to the next one, we have the next way of drawing the compte. We have the compte à colonne séparée. So this one is a direct inverse of the first one, in that the debit and the credit columns are not placed right next to each other, so they are separated. So to our far left of this one, we have les dates. So les dates, c'est toujours là, the libellé, and we have the debit side. So the whole left-hand side of this thing is just to the date libellé, debit, these are all the dat and libellé, they're repeated. So what really differentiates the two is the debit and the credit side. Then on our right hand side from the middle, we have la date encore, the libellé encore, and the credit. So from the name colonne séparée, we have the debit and the credit side separated from each other. So moving on to the last one, we have le compte schématique. This one is by far the most common type, and because it doesn't have a libellé, so it's quite easier to establish and less time consuming. So for this one, we just have nom de compte, and we have the debit and the credit. So we have something missing here, which is la date. La date for this one is, so in this one, we just write figures. So let's say if we have capital of 10,000, instead of writing, if we're dealing with a cash account and we have capital of 10,000, so what we would have to do is just write capital, then you write the date just next to the amount. So you write the date in the simple format of writing the date, where you just write the date and the month. So you just write the day and the month in numerals and the amount that was accompanied it. So you have no libellé on this one. So you have to find the solde as well. So let me try, I think, okay, sorry, I am not able to edit in how I would write a figure for this one, but if you could, so here, bon, I am not able to edit in anything actually. So sorry for that, I'm not able to edit in anything, but I hope you understand the logic. So the date, the amount will just follow there, and to the amount, just next to the amount, would attach the date, so not to get confused. I have a question, the highlighted part. Oh, this must have come a long time ago. So then we have an example here, which we are going to do, I think, if you don't have any questions. So up to where we are now, does anyone have a question, concerns? Try using the drawn option. So this question is from Linda. I'm actually not able to edit onto this thing that's already drawn, but I am able to highlight certain things, but not edit something. So I'd need to make another representation on Microsoft, on Word or something. So any questions, concerns, things I need to repeat on?
I've got a question on the account separate. If you
Yeah.
have the sold, the difference, where are you going to place it? Like, how can you place the sold since they're separate, each one on its side? The debit side is separate and the credit side is separate. Where are you going to put the sold on the
Okay.
account separate?
Thank you for that. So I have, here is an example that was already worked out. So despite the columns being placed on opposite sides, they still work under the same logic. It's still the same account. So here we have the debit side, which amounted to 8,000, and we have the credit side, which amounted to a figure less than 8,000. So let me try to calculate that just in a minute. So this side amounted to 3,500. So I just did the difference of the total minus the sold. So what happens here is that despite them being placed on opposite sides, the sold still gets to be added onto the lesser side. So we have 8,000 here, and here the total was 3,500. So 3,500, what do we have to add to 3,500 to get 8,000? It's 4,500, so which is so debitor. So like before, it's so debited because it's taken the name of the greater side. So the greater side was debited. So the figure is so debited. So I hope that's clear for where the sword is placed. So in a case where it was the left-hand side which was greater, so by any chance, let me reverse this transaction. Let me say all the figures which are on the credit side are on the debit side, and all the figures which are on the debit are on the credit. So what would happen is this amount, the sword, would have to move to this other libele. So the libele, the sword would be sword creditor because the left-hand side would be greater than the right-hand side. So, but because the right-hand side, because the credit side would be greater, so it's sword creditor. And the totals would be equal. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions, concerns? Okay, so moving on to the example which we have here. Let me just start it from the beginning. So the first amount is avoir en caisse, which is on the first. It's avoir en caisse 500 dirhams. So this avoir en caisse, usually there's some logic behind certain transactions that is not explained. So this one, avoir en caisse 500. So we know that if we have cash, it's not credited. So we cannot have cash that is credited. We can't have cash that is credited because if we have cash that is credited, it means it's a loan, rather. It's a loan. So in this case, cash is always debited. It's debited in its nature. So that transaction would be put, well, I'm just going to place it in the compte here. To make things easy for you, we're just going to place it in the first solution we have. So we have this, it's drawn, sold à nouveau. So this sold à nouveau, this cash was taken in from a previous accounting period, and it was an amount of 500. So it's debited, like I said before. We cannot have cash that we carried on that's credit. That's not possible. So except here they made a mistake. It's supposed to be 500 and not 5,000. I don't know if it's in the solution or in the question where the mistake was. So moving on to the second one, we have achat de marchandises 2000 dirhams. This is going to be put off as, what we are dealing with here is, I forgot to mention this, it's a compte case. So we are looking at this transaction from the cash point of view. So in a question where it says achat, in this question where it says achat de marchandises, so we are looking at this transaction in the sense that what happened to the cash? Only the cash. So if we buy something, it means we lost cash. So losing something means it's credited. So henceforth, we have cash as credited there. And what you write on the libele, I don't know if I mentioned this, is the corresponding transaction, like what happened on the other side. So if this is the cash account, what happened on the other side? So if we bought goods with cash, if we are standing at the cash, what happened on the other side? We bought goods. That's the logic here. So we have done the second one. Moving on to the 8th of October, we have vente de marchandises. So vente de marchandises is that we sold goods. So in this case, we gained cash. So someone paid for those goods to us. So our cash account is debited with an amount of 1,000 dirhams. So there we have it on the 8th. On the 8th, we have vente de marchandises, which is the transaction which happened on the opposite side. If we are standing at the cash, and we have an amount of 1,000 debited, because what happened to the cash this time is that we gained an amount of money because we sold goods. So we lost goods and earned money for them. Moving on to the example on the 9th, we have achat de fourniture de bureau. So furniture de bureau, if we bought this furniture de bureau, or furniture de bureau is just office furniture. So if we bought these goods, this furniture de bureau, it means what happened to our cash is that we lost an amount of money and gained these furniture. So our amount of money is going to be credited. So there we have it. We have achat de fourniture, and we have 800 as our amount credited because we lost a sum of money of 800 dirhams. So moving on to the transaction on the 10th over there, we have vente de marchandises. So here again, we are selling goods. So if we're selling goods, it means we lost the goods and gained a sum of money in exchange for them. So it means our cash account is going to be debited with an amount of 2,000 because we gained an amount of 2,000 worth of cash. So there we have it. The transaction on the 10th, we have 2,000 placed on the debit hand side because we sold goods and gained cash for them. And we have the transaction on the 11th. So it says règlement électricité. So règlement is payment of electricity. So if we pay for electricity, it means we have lost some money to pay for the bill. So what happens to our cash is that it decreases. So it's credited. So we're going to have a credit of 200 dirhams. And there we have it, the transaction on the 11th. We have règlement électricité and 200 dirhams corresponding to that transaction as credited. And lastly, we have the transaction on the 20th, which is règlement les salariés de mois of 5,000. So it says régler les salariés du mois. So we have payment of salaries for the month. So if we paid the salaries, it means we lost amount of cash, which is worth 500 dirhams. Then we'll have to add the totals of each individual side. So, and each side was each side was 8,000. Bon, the largest side was 8,000, which was the debit side, and the credit side was 3,500, which was the lesser side as the credit side. So the difference between 8,000 and 3,500 is 4,500, which is the sole debitor. So I repeat, the sole debitor has taken its name from the greater side between the two. So that's it for balance the comptes. For specifically to the person who requested that I should repeat this topic, I hope it is clear this time. If not, I don't mind repeating it. And to the rest of you guys, I hope I have solidified the information. So any questions, further explanations, clarifications, quoi que ce soit, je suis là. Okay, so I think now we are going to have a break of 15 minutes for you guys to assimilate what I have. When you are establishing a book and there was already a book before, you use the information from the book before to establish the new one. So that's the whole logic. So this one takes its information from the journal. So I'm going to try to read this for you. So the first part, it says document obligatoire. So this is an obligatory book. It is, you're not supposed to skip it. You're not supposed to move from the journal all the way to la balance without doing the Grande Livre. Même si it works exactly the same as la balance, you are still supposed to establish it unless in situations where you are told not to do so. But those are just exam situations, but real life standard, you are to establish everything. So it says, it moves on to say, le Grand Livre reprend pour chaque compte ouvert par l'entreprise. So what this one says is that it takes into account each and every transaction opened or enacted by the enterprise. So it says it groups by nature. So what it means is that it groups by nature. It moves in a chronological order. So like I said, it starts from class 1 all the way to class 5. So first you start with class 1, and in the chronological order of the counts or their codes. So you move from 111 to 1112 to 1113 and see the suite. You are not supposed to jumble them whatsoever. So I think that summarizes it for these notes, except let me try to skim through just quickly to see if there's anything important that needs to be mentioned. Okay, so that's basically it for this book. So this book can be established in this way, but this isn't the way I had given it to you. I remember that very well. Well, it's just basically compte. So it can be either the compte schématique, compte marié, compte colonne séparée. It can be either one of those, but the most common format you would find is the compte schematic, because like we saw before, it's quite easy to establish. There's no need to write a libellé, things move quite quickly with that one. So how it would play off is that if you start class 1, so from the journal, you look for every transaction which had class 1 attached to it. So when you find, most likely capital is on it starts, because it's the very first thing in the plan comptable, and usually it's the opening of the business, so you can't skip that. So when we establish that one, we write on top of, we write like in what class they belong to. So you write class 1, then the compte schematic, you write it, and where it said compte, numéro de compte, you write the code and the name of the compte. So in this case, we're speaking of capital. You write the figures, then you find the sold, you move on to what's next, just comme ça. So I don't know if that's, well, it even says here this point in both, in NB, it says dans un esprit de simplification, on n'utilise que des comptes schématiques. So yeah, like I said before. Donc, c'est fait avec ce livre-là. Est-ce que vous avez besoin vous avez des questions ou quoi? Je ne sais pas même si vous avez des questions. Si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à les poser. Je suis là à votre disponibilité. So, questions, concerns, objections, arguments, everything's welcome.
For the presentation of the Grand Livre, since you said you need to classify
Excuse
them.
me, can you please speak loudly? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay, the presentation of the Grand Livre, since you said we put the things according to the classes, we don't have to jumble them. For the codes, where do we place them? Is it next to the amount or what? Or maybe we make a small column for the codes.
Okay, so using the Comptes schematic, let me just draw you onto that quickly to answer your question rapidly. So this is the Comptes schematic, and how you write it is here where you have nom de compte. Let's say if it's capital, so you write capital, and just right next to it before you write this credit thing, you write the number. So it can either be, you write the code, so it can either be onto your left or onto your right, onto your left or onto your right. So it's up to you, but the code should be written. It's for easier, it's for transparency purposes. So then if you are using, if for any reason you choose to use either this one or these two, if you choose to use either one of the two, you'd have to indicate a column, another column, a separate one for the codes to make things much more clear. But this, I think this one is, this Comptes schematic is quite easier because you just write the figures. So there's no need to write the libelle because that draws some time. So you just strictly write the figures. If it's 5,000, just seen, just write it. 6,000, just write it. So any other questions, clarifications? Okay, so now moving on to the last thing which was requested that we revise, which was the C.P.C, the Compte des Produits et des Charges. Just a minute for me to turn to that page. It's on page 29 of the summarized book. So there we have it. So le C.P.C, c'est un état de synthèse comme le bilan. So what état de synthèse is a book of, I'm starting to forget my English. Okay, it's like a book of last entry because it's what you record at the end of an accounting period. So the bilan and the C.P.C are strictly written at the end of an accounting period. So, like I said, there are instances where the bilan comes at the beginning, but that's only to signify the previous accounting period. But for the C.P.C, it's strictly at the end. So we have this C.P.C, the produits et les charges. Les produits are the gains, the incomes, and the charges are the expenses, les dépenses. So it's simply an account for our incomes and our expenses during a period of time. And this book is also called Livre, c'est un livre de gestion. Reason being is that because our expenses and our incomes are our day-to-day activities. So it's a book in which we record our day-to-day transactions, henceforth the name utile de gestion. So it's for the purposes of management on a day-to-day basis. So that marks that. So we move on to the second part. So we have the definition on top there, then we have the part which is called les comptes de produits sont en trois types. So, bon, before I come to this, the main purpose of establishing the C.P.C is to find what we call le résultat. Le résultat is like is to either find whether you're profitable or you're making a loss. So the general formula for finding the résultat is produit moins charge. So the reason why it's produit moins charge is that produit is what we make our income and charge our expenses. So if this was an instance of a worker, let's say a civil servant, his produit would be his income, his monthly salary, and his charge would be the cost of money he uses, the school fees for the children, household supplies, food, tusa. So what the logic is that we should be able to have something left after we have spent our monthly. We should be able to have something left from our salary after we have spent our monthly expenses. That means we have a profit. So if the produit is greater than the charge, it means we have a profit. In this case, it's called résultat bénéficiaire. So if the charge, if the expenses, so a real life situation is if our expenses are greater than our income, it means we have a loss. So under this thing, it's called the résultat déficit. So we have le résultat bénéficiaire and le résultat déficit, those two things. So in other terms, it's just profit or loss. So moving on to les trois types de produits, we have le produit d'exploitation. So le produit d'exploitation are our gains, incomes that are strictly related to the affairs of a business. So if it's a business which is involved in selling of, well, if it's a supermarket, let's say Majan, its produit in this case would be vente produit. So the selling of the goods that are present in Majan are the produit exploitation. So these are the produits qui sont directement rattachés au cycle d'exploitation. So that's in French. In English, it would be, these are our incomes that we gain from selling what we directly sell. So like Majan, they're selling of goods, those goods that they have, they're direct, just selling those goods would be le produit d'exploitation. So moving on to le produit financier. So these are the types de produits, ils sont trois. So we have the produit d'exploitation, and secondly, we have produit financier. So let's take into this account the same example, Majan. Let's say Majan has a branch of its own which gives out loans to people on a credit basis, and they charge people an interest rate. So that interest rate is an income to them because that's using money to make money. It's like investing. So that interest, that money they gain from interest would be the produit financier, because it is not directly attached to their goods and services. So it is strictly using money to make money. That's the logic of the produit financier. So them giving out loans and the interest rates they charge being incomes would be le produit financier. Then we have le produit non courant. So these are the produits de immobilisation. Bon, a simple explanation would be, these are the gains they make from their fixed products. So the produit exploitation are their current assets. The current assets being the goods that are found directly in Majan. So now this produit non-courant would be a situation where Majan has premises, like they have a yard. Well, yeah, Majan, they have a yard, they have premises. So if they rent out their premises for events, that the amount of money they gain from there would be a produit non-courant, because they're using their fixed asset, which in this case is land, to make money. So it depends on what you are using to make your money, which determines to which category it falls under. So petite repetition, if you're using your current assets, it's a produit d'exploitation. If you're using money to make money, produit financier. If you're using your fixed assets to make money, produit non-courant. Non-courant is just, bon, it's not non-circulating. So I hope that's clear for le produit. Moving on to les charges. We have trois types aussi. On a trois types de charges ici aussi. Le premier, c'est que c'est les charges d'exploitation. So these are charges that are directly related to our business, like us buying. So in the case of Majan, they're directly related to our business affairs. In a case of Majan, them buying goods from their suppliers would be classified as a charge d'exploitation, because their main occupation is the selling of current assets. So I hope that one is clear. Moving on to the charge financier. The charge financier in this case would be Majan getting a loan from another place, and to that loan there's an interest rate attached to it. So that interest rate to another person, let's say they're getting from the Banque Commerciale de Maroc. Yeah, the way we have Bank of Zambia now, in the Moroccan version, Bank Commerciale. So they're getting from a bank, and what happens is that they charge them an interest rate. So the extra amount they would have to pay would be classified as a charge financier because they're getting it from other people. And lastly, we have the charge non-courant, which would be, an example would be, let's say Majan offers delivery services, but it does not have its own vehicles to deliver the goods. So in a case where Majan uses a transportation agency, so to that transportation agency, they pay an amount of money to use the goods, to use their transportation. That would be classified as a charge non-courant because the transportation is a fixed asset. So I hope I'm not speaking too fast for your understanding. I hope everything has been clear, because it's the understanding that really helps you classify what goes where, which goes there. Donc, ça va? Hello. So moving on to now how the representation.
Sorry, Cholo. Could you please explain again on charge d'exploitation?
Ok, ça va. So, les charges d'exploitation, ce sont des charges qui sont directement rattachées à les activités de l'entreprise. Donc, petite explication. So these are the charges which are directly related to a business's affairs. So if in question we have Majan here. So Majan has goods in it, but it's not all the goods that they produce for themselves. So the goods that they buy from other places, other companies, quoi que ce soit, that's a charge d'exploitation, because it's an expense that is directly related to running of the business. Because without the goods present in Majan, it wouldn't be what it is. So the process of them buying from other places makes it a charge d'exploitation, because those goods are directly related to the affairs of the business. Hope that's clear. So moving on to, I think there should be a representation. Donc voilà, this is the representation. So this is just it roughly. Just a minute, sorry. So this is a representation of the C.P.C. It's not yet there. So this is how the C.P.C. comes off. It's so, except in this situation, these are just headings. So under these headings, we have things that fall under it. So I'll go with you step by step. So here we have produit et charge. Well, that's just the name. And the first point is produit d'exploitation. And the second one is charge d'exploitation. So remember what I said before, to find the résultat. So from these two, the first two, we have number 3 there, which is called le résultat d'exploitation. So remember what I said before, to find le résultat, it's produit moins charge. So our incomes minus our expenses. So le produit d'exploitation, how this would come off is le produit d'exploitation. There would be a list of things underneath there, like actual transactions which are classified under produit d'exploitation. Then would have a total somewhere there, and would have a charge d'exploitation, a list of figures, a list of transactions which are directly related to the charge d'exploitation, and we have an amount there. We have a total there. So what this résultat d'exploitation is from here, you can see 1 minus 2 from here. I hope, let me just try to highlight that. So there's this part I have highlighted as 1 minus 2. So 1 is le produit d'exploitation, moins 2, les charges d'exploitation. So produit moins charge nous donne le résultat d'exploitation. So the two totals I said, the totals for the produit d'exploitation, you write it down there. The total for the charge d'exploitation, you write it down there. So you find the difference. So the difference between the two is what we call le résultat d'exploitation. So this logic of finding the difference is it's what makes up the C.P.C. It's quite easy actually if you know what falls where or which falls where. It's quite easy that way. But if you don't know, it becomes a bit difficult, because what if you jumble them? If you jumble them, the figure is automatically wrong. So if you jumble them even just by the slightest thing, the figure is wrong. So now that we've done the produit et les charges, so we've done le produit d'exploitation moins les charges d'exploitation, nous donne quoi? Le résultat d'exploitation. Voilà. So I have explained up to number 3. So up to number 3, I hope I am clear. The Roman numeral 3 on the first column. I hope I'm clear on that one. Okay, so moving on to le produit financier. So after we do the produit d'exploitation and the produit financier. So if you notice before, the classifications or the types, they each had 3 of them, and those 3 of them were exactly the same. The only difference was the part where it was either produit or charge. So all of them were d'exploitation, all of them were financier, all of them were non-courant. So by that order, that's how you will classify them. So starting from Roman numeral 4. Roman numeral 4, we have produit financier. So produit financier, we have things under it that are found under it. So, okay, these things, you really just have to memorize them using the plan comptable. They are they're quite easy to master. You just have to work on them every day. You master at least 3, 5, whatever you can manage. So we have le produit financier, which is going to have subdivisions as well, like individual transactions, and it's going to have a total. And le charge financier is going to have subdivisions as well. So we have 2 totals at the end, which is the total de produit financier. So the total of this first one minus the total of this second one. So that instances where it's actually 1, so you can have the produit financier as one thing. So you just place the amount there. There's no need to add 1 million to 0. So what you'd have to find, like the formula says, produit moins charge égale à quoi? Le résultat. So Roman numeral 6 is le résultat financier. So in brackets here we have Roman numeral 4 minus 5. So the 4 minus 5 is le produit financier which is the fourth thing. Moi, les charges financières. So the difference between these two is what will give us les résultats financiers. So for le produit financier, for les choses d'exploitation et les choses financières, j'espère que je suis clair. Sinon, s'il vous plaît, me posez des questions parce que ça, c'est un peu... Je sais que c'est pas assez facile de comprendre la première fois, mais il faut que... C'est ça que je suis là. Je vais vous expliquer si vous avez des trucs. So, do you have questions? Okay, so I presume that's a no. Moving on to...
For example, if you are dealing with the produit d'exploitation and then the figures on the monte, you just write what is the difference, the result of the difference between the charges and the products, right?
Yes, for the résultat, that's the only thing you write.
Okay, all right. Don't include any other calculation, like the way you are finding, maybe you're indicating the amount of the producer, the charges and the products. Like you don't show any calculation and all that, you just write the direct difference, which is the result.
Okay, so you can choose to work that way, honestly, because what is marked is just le résultat. They don't mark what you have on the produit d'exploitation. They don't mark what you have on the charge d'exploitation. Ça, c'est à vous de le faire. So what they only mark is the résultat. So in this case, they'll simply go to the third one, the résultat d'exploitation. If it's correct, you get a point. The résultat financier, if it's correct, you get a point. But for clarity purposes, like after you're done with everything and you have some time left, I think it would be more advisable for you to actually write down the figures. So let's take into consideration the first one. I'll go back to the first one, which must be Roman numeral 1, we have the produit d'exploitation. So under le produit d'exploitation, we have things that fall under there. So there are a lot of things. It's not just one. It's a list of things actually. So we write them down and their corresponding figures. And we find the total of those things. So the total of only the produit d'exploitation. So we write the total somewhere. Bon, on the montant, we simply have to write the résultat. So we write the total somewhere and we go to the charge d'exploitation. And there's a list of things again, which is found under charge d'exploitation. So you have to list them down, write the corresponding figures, and you find their total. So what I will do then is the total of the list of things for the produit d'exploitation minus the total of the list of things for the charge d'exploitation, which is simply summarized as this. 1 moins 2, which is... So I don't know if that has helped answer your question, or maybe I didn't understand it well.
It has. Thank you very much.
Ok. So, je suis arrêté au niveau de... Bon, ici. So, we are on Roman numeral 7, which is le résultat courant. So, le résultat courant is an addition. So, this thing is just addition and subtraction, except you have to know where to add and where to subtract. Moreover, oh, by the way, at ENCG, like I said before, nothing will ever be drawn for you. So this order of things, you have to know it. Nothing will ever be drawn for you. I think for the economics students, they don't really do comptabilité as a practical thing. They do it more of a theoretical thing, in the sense that your exams will be, for the economics people, your exams will be multiple choice questions. So, but their calculations like this, except the answers are given in a multiple choice manner. So it's up to you to know how the method works for you to find the right answer, for you to find the right option. But for ENCG students, they just give you plain papers and some questions. You will never find the multiple choice question, firstly. Secondly, you will never find a table already drawn for you, unless otherwise. But so far from what I have seen and experienced myself, they just give you plain papers. So it's up to you to know this comes first, this comes that. You have to master this table, in short. So moving on to where I had left off, which was le résultat courant. The résultat courant is an addition of the first résultat which we had is as le résultat d'exploitation, and the second résultat as le résultat financier. Henceforth, the formula, which is 3 plus 6. So 3 being le résultat d'exploitation, we have it there, and 6 being le résultat financier. So le résultat courant, ça compose de deux choses, je répète. Première chose, ça compose le résultat d'exploitation. Et la deuxième chose, ça comprend le résultat financier. Ces deux valeurs, on doit les ajouter pour trouver une montant qui s'appelle le résultat courant. J'espère que c'est clair. Sinon, ok, so, oui, c'est clair, d'accord. On passe. So that's, c'est la fin de la première moitié de C.P.C. That's the end of the first half. So now we're going to the second half. It's still based on the same principle of produit moins charge. So Roman numeral 8. Roman numeral 8. I think let me just zoom into it to make things a bit more clear. So Roman numeral 8, we have le produit non courant. So the produit non courant also has a list of things. It's not just one thing. There's just not one thing called le produit non courant. We have a list of them. So it's up to you to know which are those things and be able to rightfully classify them. So we have a list, and like we have done on top, we add and we find the totals of the list. And again, we have les charges non courant. So these charges are also have a list. They're also a list of things which we add and we find the totals of the two. So what Roman numeral 10 is le résultat non courant. So le résultat non courant is the difference between the produit non courant moins les charges non courant. So I hope that's clear for this part. So I think an easy way to help you understand this thing is that just know how many steps they are. So if you find that you're done with the whole C.P.C, but you are less steps than you know they're supposed to be, it means you made a mistake somewhere. So just master the number of steps. So 13 steps. I'm pretty sure that shouldn't be much to memorize. Then after this, we have what we call a résultat avant impôt. So what this is simply, which is Roman numeral 11. So it's le résultat courant plus le résultat non courant, c'est ça. So the current result and the non-current result give us what we call le résultat avant impôt. So I don't know if, okay, let me take a pause to ask you people, jusqu'à 10, up to Roman numéro 10. Is it clear?
Chole, can you repeat on impose sur le résultat and yes, XII and XII?
Okay, cool. I'll get to that. I'm just asking for now, up to 10, is it clear? Up to 10, strictly up to 10.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question saying, what are the produits non courants et les... okay, the produits non courants et les charges non courants. So, this draws us back to the theoretical part, which I will put on the screen for better understanding. So we said we have 3 types of produit and we have 2 types of charges. And the third one on each of them is respectively les produits non courants et les charges non courants, respectively. So then what these non courants are, okay, I can't put them together. So I'll start with the produits non courants. What these are produits, like these are, an explanation would be the incomes that we get from someone using our fixed assets. So the example I gave was Majan. So let's take into account Majan. So Majan has premises, has land. Maybe panja pa Majan che paja pa mene paja. Mukapeza ka function ka shtika vija. It means they have rented out the place to the people who are holding the function. So the act of them gaining money just because land, but because people are using the premises, which is a fixed asset, is classified as a produit non courant. So to the person that asked, is the first half clear? Because I have to make a clear-cut distinction between the produit et les charges. Okay, so I will presume that was clear. So the second half of your answer is les charges non courants. So in a case where, this is a case where Majan offers delivery services for certain goods, but they themselves do not have a transportation. They do not have transport systems. They don't have buses. They don't have counters. Yeah, they don't have vehicles at all. But they use a transportation agency to transport their goods. So the act of them paying that transportation agency to use their fixed assets, so the transport is fixed, is a fixed asset. The transport is a fixed asset. So the act of Majan using another transportation system to transport its goods makes it a charge non courant. So it's a fixed charge because it is being used by a fixed asset. But it comes up by the use of a fixed asset which does not belong to us. So I hope I am clear on that one. So moving on to the question someone had asked me concerning the résultat avant import. So le résultat avant import is an addition of le résultat courant, which was Roman numeral. Sorry. So le résultat avant import is an addition of le résultat courant, which is Roman numeral 7, and le résultat non courant, which is Roman numeral 10. Henceforth, the formula here, 7 plus 10. So it's just C'est courant plus non-courant, c'est ça. So then this import sur le résultat. This is it's given to us as a percentage. So here's an instance where they've given it to us as import sur le résultat de 20%. So we are supposed to do 20% of le résultat avant import. I don't know if you get that. So it's like tax. So let's say le résultat avant import, which is Roman numeral 11, we had 10,000. And in our information, we are given import sur le résultat as 20%. So we are supposed to do 20% of 10,000 to get the import sur le résultat. So am I clear on that one?
Please explain again.
Okay, so we have, I'll start from Roman numeral 11, which is the last half. We have le résultat avant import. Le résultat avant import is an addition of Roman numeral 7, which is the résultat courant, plus Roman numéro 10, which is le résultat non courant. So it's simply an addition of the courant plus the non courant. C'est ça. C'est ça le résultat avant import. Alors, l'import sur le résultat, c'est un pourcentage. C'est toujours un pourcentage. On doit le. My God. It's a percentage which is charged onto le résultat avant import. So this Roman numeral 12 is usually given to us in the information, in the transactions. It's usually placed as the last thing they would write. So let's say we have import sur le résultat de 20%. So what we have to do is, if le résultat avant import, which is Roman numeral 11, was 10,000, and they're telling us this import sur le résultat, which is Roman numeral 12, was 20%. So we have to do 20% of 10,000, which should be 2,000, if I'm not mistaken. So then, I've given it to you as 2,000, right? So here, if le résultat avant import was 10,000, here, I don't know if you can follow the mouse cursor. Okay, so if le résultat avant import was 10,000 and l'import sur le résultat was 2,000, what we do now is we find the difference, which is 8,000, which is our final answer as the net résultat. So I hope that's clear. I know there are a lot of steps. I know they are not quite easy to follow the first time, which is why I suggest that you ask me questions as much as possible, because your professors, they'll just explain to you things like, and most of them are old people, so they're already tired, bored. They teach the same thing every year. So I personally never learned sensible comptabilité from my prof, because he usually used to say, on a déjà fait ça. There was my prof for analyse and comptabilité, because all the Moroccans take analyse in the high school, and some of them take comptabilité. But he just used to say, on a déjà vu ça, on a déjà fait ça. So he really just used to cruise through things. And déjà ka French kavuta, so it was just by the grace of God. So questions, concerns, additions, subtractions before we close this session? Okay, so I guess that's it. Jusqu'à la prochaine fois. Au revoir.